Hi and welcome back to the channel. If you haven't been here before, welcome to the channel. Gonna give you a little bit of foreshadowing before I start talking about the movie. I'm gonna tell you about something weird that happened to me with my radio gig this week, which really spun my head around. So I'm gonna tell you about that after I talk about the three movies, but it's really odd. Let's just put it that way. A question has arisen during my movie viewing, and it's pretty simple. Can a science fiction movie not be a science fiction movie? And I'm going to explain that with the third movie I talk about, the most recent of the three movies I'm going to talk about. And in some ways, kind of interesting, but... So, Umbrella Entertainment here in Australia has celebrated its 20th year of producing movies on disc. And I like Umbrella a lot as a company. They're not a sponsor. It's not sponsored at all. But they're a local company. They do bare bones versions of movies on DVD and on Blu-ray. And they've really been putting out some interesting product. I suppose they keep the production costs low by not putting out extras and documentaries and commentary tracks and things like that. And they're a good company if you just want the bare bones of a movie. And they've had some specials on at the moment, which is wonderful for me. In fact, all of the Australian retailers of DVDs and Blu-rays have got specials on at the moment, which leads us to think that there's a possibility they may be phasing them out in physical stores, which would be a pity because there are some really great companies doing things, and Umbrella is one of them. But they've been putting out some double feature discs, and I'm going to talk about one of the movies as a double feature. They're called Retro Sci-Fi Double Feature. I'm not fond of the term sci-fi myself. And one of the volumes they put out is this one, which has The Mole People and The Land Unknown. Again, they're bare bones. They're quite good transfers as well. They're not like janky things with hairs in the gate and lines down the screen or anything like that. They are quite good reproductions. And The Land Unknown is the one I'm going to talk about because it's the one I haven't seen before yesterday. It's from 1957 and it's got some really weird sexual politics in it. The story's fairly simple. Jock Mahoney plays an Air Force captain who takes a helicopter into Antarctica to head towards the American Antarctic base from a ship, and they go off course and end up in a weird fog. They try to land and end up 2,500 feet below sea level in a lost hidden valley full of volcanoes and dinosaurs and tropical things and carnivorous plants. So it's a Lost World movie, kind of like The Mole People is, but in a very different way. In The Mole People, the Lost World is at the top of a mountain. This one is way below sea level in an Antarctic valley. Now, the average land height in Antarctica is below sea level. It's the ice that gives everything above sea level. Antarctica is a really weird place. I've got a friend who's been there, and he went to one of the driest places on Earth, which was one of the ice-free valleys in Antarctica. Really weird place, but I'm fairly sure it doesn't have any living dinosaurs in it, and it doesn't have any weird characters like we find in this movie. There's a crew of four. There's Jock Mahoney's character. There's two other Air Force guys, and there's a female journalist turning up, played by Sean Smith. And she's there basically to stop the whole thing from being a sausage party and to give us a little bit of dramatic tension in the last third of the movie.
Look at those two. Man and wife?
No, both males.
So the crew gets sideswiped by a giant pterodactyl, as you do. And they have a crash landing in this valley and try to fix one of the bits of the mechanism, but because it's made of a magnesium alloy, it snaps and they can't get off. They can't get radio contact with the search planes that are looking for them because their batteries are low, and they've got to try to find a way out of their situation. It's incredibly hot and humid in the valley because being below sea level, the air pressure would be higher, I suppose, and because of the volcanic heat, it's hot. They find all sorts of dinosaurs there, which is always fun. It's what kind of movie I would have really loved as a kid. And they do that wonderful thing that old movies did, which is wonderful and horrible at the same time. I think they feed amphetamines to a couple of iguanas, and have the iguanas fight in slow motion against a jungle backdrop. So there are so many movies where that happens. And we get that in here. But we also get a couple of rubber-suited guys. You got one being a T-Rex. And it's the jankiest looking rubber suit T-Rex you've ever seen in your life. And there's a pterosaur as well swimming in the river that runs through this Lost Valley. The tension comes because while they're exploring the Lost Valley, they find a guy who's been trapped there for 10 years. And he's gone totally insane. He's kind of like, remember when you read or watched Treasure Island? And there was Ben Gunn, the old guy who'd been on the island for a long time and went crazy. This is kind of like a cross between Ben Gunn and Stuart Whitman's character in Sands of the Kalahari. He's muscular, he's an ubermensch. I think he's been reading a little bit too much Nietzsche. And he's decided that he's going to help them get out of the valley. He's got some helicopter parts that he's stashed away from his crashed helicopter. And he has a part that they need to escape. But he wants to cut a deal.
I think you could replace this out of it. I'll tell you where it is, then the three of you will go. And the woman stays here.
The three guys can go, but they leave the woman with him. And there's the problem. Her name's Maggie. She's played by an actress called Sean Smith. And this guy, having been an incel for 10 years, decides that he doesn't want to get out of the Lost Valley. He just wants a bit of companionship. Now, that's pretty messed up. Problem is, as time goes on and the clock's ticking, they've got 25 days to get out of the valley before the Navy ship goes away and stops looking for them. And the other two guys, apart from Jock Mahoney's character, go, well, maybe he's got a point. Maybe we've got to get out of here. So why don't we just chuck him the woman and get the hell out of town? Again, that's really messed up sexual politics. Of course, there's a romance between Maggie and the Jock Mahoney character because he's the tallest of the guys and he looks best with his shirt off. But this movie is really, really messed up with that sexual politics. Things end up, everybody gets out of the valley, basically. I'm going to do a spoiler for it. Watch the movie. You're going to be wowed by the janky special effects. But the thing is that everybody gets off the valley. And in the last scenes, you see them in the helicopter. And Rapey McIncel is sitting in the back seat alongside the woman. Which surprised the shit out of me. I thought, what the hell were they thinking? But this, you got to remember, was Hollywood in the 50s and 60s. Well, in the 50s in this case. And they forgave all sorts of egregious things during that time. It's in wonderful black and white, this movie. It's in CinemaScope, which always struck me as weird. If you're going to do a widescreen movie in CinemaScope, why wouldn't you pony up the extra bucks to make it in colour? Because I think that CinemaScope just asks to be made in colour, but there are a whole bunch of even large budget movies that were done in black and white in CinemaScope, and there feels something wrong about that. But anyway, The Land Unknown, with its janky dinosaurs and really messed up sexual politics, is an interesting Lost World movie. So check that one out if you get an opportunity to. These retro science fiction double features are really interesting. They've got a few different things. They've got a few different formats for them. I don't know whether they're regions free. No, they're locked into Region B. So you'll need a multi-region Blu-ray player to watch them. And to be honest with you, if you're into physical media, get one. You're going to have access to a lot more stuff, a lot more cheaply, and Australia's exchange rate is pretty poor at the moment. So if you're from anywhere else in the world, you're probably going to get a bargain if you can just pony up for that Blu-ray player. But anyway, it's on to the second movie, which is from 1969, so you know it's good. It is written by Jerry and Sylvia Anderson, directed by a guy called Robert Parrish, and produced by Jerry Anderson, and it's been asked for on this channel by a lot of people in the comments. Journey to the Far Side of the Sun, starring Roy Thinnes, Patrick Wymark, Ian Hendry, and also Herbert Lom at the start of the film. And It's really weird that I actually got that version, which is the Blue Underground version. It's from America, so it's region A. And then for some reason, while I was searching through the sales at Umbrella, I got the double feature set of Journey to the Far Side of the Sun and Colossus the Forbin Project. I also have Colossus the Forbin Project on another Blu-ray, so I'm going to give this one to a friend, but I just kind of went mad when how cheap things were at the sales, and I bought it anyway. Now, my fault, and Sally's probably going to give me crap for spending money on it, but that's what happens when you collect physical media. Occasionally you're going to double up, and the struggle is real. But anyway, let's talk about the movie. I'll go back to the single cover. Journey to the Far Side of the Sun. Now, pretty much everybody knows the story. The European Space Agency in the year 2069 has discovered that there's a planet orbiting exactly opposite the Earth on the other side of the Sun, and it looks like it's habitable. So the head of the European Space Agency, played by Patrick Wymark, his name is Jason, decides that he wants to send a manned, and in this case it is manned because there are no women cosmonauts or astronauts in this world for some reason. Eurosec, the European Space Agency, isn't going to pony up all the money, so they get NASA involved. And NASA's liaison is played by Ed Bishop, who I like in a lot of things. He's the only guy in this movie I ever met, and he was a charming gentleman. If you ever get a chance to watch UFO, the series that he starred in, or anything else with Ed Bishop in it, watch it knowing that the guy was lovely. He was a really gentle guy, very shy and diffident, and really one of the celebrities that I've met for whom I had a lot of respect because of just the fact that he was real and grounded and an interesting character as well. But leaving that aside, he's only in the movie a bit. You've got Roy Thinnis playing Glenn, the astronaut that the Americans fob off onto the space agency. Ian Hendry plays the other astronaut, who's British, obviously. And so they send them to this planet on the other side of the sun by putting them into a kind of suspended animation for 3 weeks. The journey takes 3 weeks there, the journey takes 3 weeks back. Now, Roy Thinnis is not an actor that I consider particularly gifted. He's like television level actor, but he's not really anchoring a cinematic movie level actor. And that's the problem with this. There are a whole bunch of really good actors in this movie. Ian Hendry's a good actor. Herbert Lom in the scenes he has at the start's a fine actor. Patrick Wymark, playing the grumpy head of the European Space Agency, is a really good actor. Interestingly enough, he died a year later at the age of 44 here in Melbourne, Australia, while he was doing some stage work here. And I only found that out today. But I like Patrick Wymark. I like him in Blood and Satan's Claw. I like him in this. I like him in The Psychopath, I think it's Amicus movie or Tygon movie from the 1960s, which is really off-the-wall crazy. He plays a police inspector in that. But this movie, I'll tell you the things that were difficult about making this movie. From everything that's said, Roy Thinnis was a bit of a prima donna on there. His wife, Lynn Loring, actually plays his wife in the movie as well. She's kind of good, playing a very thankless character. And the Roy Thinnis character, Glenn, is a bit of a shit, to be honest with you. He's not a virtuous character in any way at all, which is odd for somebody who's supposed to be your viewpoint protagonist in a movie. But Roy Thinnis apparently was a prima donna, and Jerry Anderson vowed never to work with him again, and rather than getting him and Lynn Loring to star in a project he had upcoming, which turned out to be Space 1999, he got another American married couple of actors, Martin Landau and Barbara Bain, to star in that. That was problem number one. Problem number two was Ian Hendry and Patrick Wymark, who they could only use in the mornings to get their scene shot, because both of them unfortunately had problems with alcohol, and they were no good on the set in the afternoon when they'd had a few shandies. Here's the good stuff. Derek Medding's model work in this is next level good for the time. Yes, in 1968 they did have Kubrick's 2001, which is the kind of peak of model making. But even on a Blu-ray, scaled up to 4K like my TV does, it looks good except in a couple of moments when there's a little bit of a matte line around a couple of characters they put into a couple of scenes. But the model work when the models are just there with no human beings in the middle are fantastic. They work really well. They are incredibly detailed, and the detail really pops on the Blu-ray edition of this. And the technology of the future is well thought out. There's a commercial airliner which is very, very groovy, and it feels a little bit like the Thunderbirds in some ways. But it's great. The spaceship designs are great. The model work on the space agency and other locations is really good, and they kind of flesh that out a lot by filming some of the other locations in Portugal, which works really well to give the movie a lived-in feel. The music by Barry Gray, who went on to do the music for Space 1999 and UFO, is really kind of it's got that kind of creepy theremin-y sound about it, but also it's very orchestral and full. And I like Barry Gray's soundtrack to this movie a lot. And there's also some serious characters in there. You've got George Sewell, who is kind of like the security guy for the European Space Agency. He gets a few nice moments in there. You get good old Vladek Shebal playing the doctor who examines the astronauts when they land on the other planet. And I'm not going to do the spoilers, find out yourself. He turns up in there as well, and I always like him in movies. He ended up teaching acting in Australia and Queensland for a while before, unfortunately, he died. So he was really well regarded, both as a character actor, but also as an acting teacher. He really did cover both sides of that and encourage new talent, so all credit to him for that. So we'll get him in there. The other thing is the set designs are fantastic. They're very 1960s/1970s futuristic. They've got things like video phones in there. They've got wrist monitors for heart rates, which is kind of an innovative little thing.
Hadn't you better attend to that cardiac warning?
And just the set designs are just beautiful. They're retro, but they're the kind of thing you're going, geez, I wish I had that in my house. They reused a lot of the sets from this movie when they did make the TV series of UFO. And it did up the production value of UFO in a lot of ways. They've even got futuristic ambulances, real cars, not models, but real cars in this one as well. And it just gives the future world they're creating, and the very troubled future world that they're creating, a lot of oomph and a lot of extra production value and a lot of verisimilitude, which I really appreciate in this. Now, the movie, of course, has a bleak ending, and it kind of goes to a very dark place, and all of the progress made by the characters throughout the movie ends up being for naught. But that gives it a kind of different feel to a lot of Gerry Anderson product, in the fact that they were willing to go dark for the climax of the film, and they were able to land it quite well. Now, of course, the premise is really stupid. The orbital dynamics of planets don't allow for planets to orbit on either side of a sun or any other kind of body they're orbiting around. Even a few tons of difference in the mass would end up with one of the planets moving a little bit faster and a little bit further out in its orbit and totally screwing up that. And the idea, and the central conceit behind the other planet is kind of silly too. You could have waved it away by saying alternate universes or something like that, but they chose not to do it and just kind of went with their groovy concept, which again, I'm not going to spoil. Watch the movie if you haven't seen it before. But it works for me. I think that even though Roy Thinnes is thin as an actor, the supporting cast lifts the game. The production values lift the game. The special effects, the set designs, the supporting character actors, the costume designs as well. Check out Patrick Wymark's character Jason. His suits are beautifully designed and look really good, and they look just different enough to be futuristic. But rewatching this, it was fun. I don't think it's the best science fiction movie ever, but I think it's a good, honest piece of late 1960s futurism, which works well as an entertainment. So that brings me to the third movie, and that's where the question comes up on, can a science fiction movie not be a science fiction movie? This movie is another one I got for Umbrella because the sales just went mad and blood rushed to my head and I bought things. It's set in Los Angeles in the near future, and it's an interesting film, but it has its problems. And it generated a short-lived TV series and a number of TV movies afterwards. And it is Alien Nation, starring James Caan and Mandy Patinkin. The conceit in this is okay. A spaceship lands in the Mojave Desert, and 250,000 alien ex-slaves pour out of it. They're put into quarantine camps for 3 years. They learn English, they learn our ways, and then they are put out into society, mostly in Los Angeles being the largest nearby population centre. So you end up with a whole new ethnic group, in fact a very alien ethnic group, in the melting pot of Los Angeles. They have another number of different cultural needs, a number of different cultural ways. They're refugees, and they are kind of the lowest socio-economic rung in the ladder in Los Angeles. They have some things that put people off. They get drunk on rancid milk. They prefer to eat raw meats. They're really fond of things like raw beaver, and I'm not going to make that joke. And they have their own language, and some assimilate more easily than others. And there are secrets involved in the aliens. So James Caan plays the rogue cop, the kind of cliched rogue cop. His wife's dead. He's a borderline alcoholic. He doesn't dress well. He's grumpy. His partner gets killed in a store robbery, a kind of corner store robbery, by one of the newcomers, who are actually called Tenctonese, but they're called newcomers in the movie, or slags to use a pejorative term. And so he's got his backup about this particular group of aliens. And for reasons known to himself, he agrees to have the first detective, Tenctonese, of the Los Angeles Police Department as his partner. And that character, of course, is played by Mandy Patinkin, who has his tongue very firmly in his cheek with this. His name is George Francisco. It was originally Sam Francisco because they did the Ellis Island thing of just giving random names to people when they kind of were processed by immigration. And so a lot of the aliens have weird names. There's a henchman character to the main villain whose name is Rudyard Kipling, for instance. And that villain, whose name is Harcourt, is played by Terence Stamp. And Terence Stamp had a very interesting period there. In the early 90s, he played a transgender person in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert here in Australia. But he was kind of stuck in a rut in the 1980s. He'd been General Zod in the Superman sequel, and couldn't kind of get out of that. He did The Limey and a few other things like that, but he was cast mostly as a villain at that stage. By the way, if you haven't seen Terence Stamp in Last Night in Soho, he is really good. He's still got his A game on him these days. But this movie I don't think is his A game. He didn't like the makeup, didn't like the character, which to be fair is kind of a cliche gang lord. And he didn't wear the makeup at the end of the movie when his character mutates. He got somebody else to do it because he was just overwearing the makeup. The two cops get together. They find out that there's a drug that the Tenctonese were addicted to keep them slaves. And somebody has reproduced that drug on Earth, being Harcourt, and is setting up for a big distribution deal so they can sell these drugs to the Tenctonese refugees and keep them under their thumb and make billions and billions of dollars from it. Here's the problem. It's not a science fiction movie. What this is a buddy cop movie with a subtext about the refugee immigrant experience. And they just happen to use aliens because aliens were cool in those days. The reason it's not science fiction is, if you want to know whether a science fiction movie is really science fiction or not, I'm going to tell you. This is a very old trope, and this is a very old kind of litmus test for real science fiction. If you take the science fiction elements out of the story, can you still tell the story? And with Alienation, the answer is definitely yes. You can substitute any other new immigrant group for the aliens in this movie. And, you know, there's a drug that those people had in their native culture. They get addicted to it. It could just as easily be Vietnamese refugees, Khmer refugees, any other ethnic group. It could have been Sri Lankans or Indians, anybody. And you'd still have that buddy cop comedy of the first detective from an ethnic group in the Los Angeles Police Department being buddied up with a grumpy cop. That isn't to say it's not a good movie, but what it is basically is a buddy cop comedy in cosplay. That's not particular criticism. It's a good buddy cop comedy. It lands fairly in the middle of that 1980s genre of buddy cop movies with lots of explosions, lots of gunplay, lots of screaming at people, lots of the boss getting pissed off with the coppers. All of that kind of stuff is in there, but it doesn't really tell a science fiction story. It tells, by analogy, the story of first generation Americans in this case, but it's a universal experience. Here in Australia, we have first and second generation Sudanese and Somali people and all sorts of other ethnic groups, and they get the same kind of shit that everybody else got when they first arrived in the country. And unfortunately, a lot of those prejudices do persist. So I'm not saying that Alienation is a bad film. I just think it's one film disguised as another kind of film. And unlike the other two stories, you can't separate the other two stories and the other two movies that I've talked about from the science fiction premise. You can't tell Journey to the Far Side of the Sun without the science fiction. You can't tell The Land Unknown without the science fiction. You kind of could, but for the most part you can't. It's a lot harder to separate the two. Lost World stories could be told as stories of European colonization and adventure, but this one with the dinosaurs and all of the other things, it's pretty much science fiction basically. Again, I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed Mandy Patinkin. I enjoyed James Caan. I think James Caan committed to the role. Mandy Patinkin did as well. 4 hours of makeup a day must have been a really hard shoot for him. You get a whole bunch of other people turning up in there as well, like Brian Thompson. And again, it's not knocking the movie. I think it does what it does fairly well. And it was successful in the fact that it did have a TV series and a whole bunch of TV movies and had a pretty much strong fan base in the 90s, which over time has faded. But before we go, I was going to tell you about the weird thing that happened yesterday with my radio gig. As some of you know, I do talk about movies on the radio for ABC local radio in the Northern Territory of Australia. So Michaela Simpson, who does the evening show with me, and we talk about movies, and I decided on a movie. We decided we're going to watch a science fiction movie, a science fiction horror movie, and we're going to talk about it at 5 p.m. pre-recording for about an 8 p.m. broadcast, which is the way we do it. So we picked the movie, and it's a good non-English language science fiction film with a nice alien in it and some body horror, and it's set in the 1980s. It's really interesting. Here's the problem. 2 hours before we were going to record, Russia invaded Ukraine, and we were going to talk about a Russian movie on the radio and say how good it was. So I quickly messaged Michaela and said, we can't do this movie. It's a Russian movie and the bastards have just invaded Ukraine. And so we worked out we were going to talk about The Bad and the Beautiful, my favourite movie of all time, instead. And we winged it with that. And I've talked about Bad and Beautiful on the radio before, so we're doubling up on that. But we're in a bit of a flurry and had to get it done. But it's interesting, the unintended consequences of a major world event on me sitting at home here in Australia. I could have kind of muscled it out and talked about the movie. By the way, the movie's called Sputnik, if you want to look it up too. But at the moment, I'm dirty on the Russian government, so I'm not going to talk about it on the channel. It's weird, the unintended consequences of things, and sometimes you've got to put your heart on your sleeve with this. So we didn't talk about that movie, and I doubt for a while I'm going to talk about Russian movies on the channel, because it feels a little bit like saying how good German movies were when you're talking in 1943. It has that feel about it. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing and leaving a comment about those 3 films. You can also support the channel by donating at patreon.com/paleocinema. So anyway, look after yourselves, particularly if you're in Ukraine. I don't know whether anybody watches the channel from there, but I wish you all the very, very best. It's monstrous, it's unfair, it's egregious, it's nasty, it's a war crime. Anyway, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Please take care of yourselves wherever you are, and I'll catch you next time.